So there's going to be a tag team today. The goal of today's presentation is just to kind of guide us to get us ready for that discussion. It's going to have a reminder. What are we doing here? What is the intent of this committee? It's going to have some reminders on funding, so the general fund mostly. And then we're going to get into conversations about different funding sources and talk about what combinations could look like. Because it doesn't have to be just one funding source. And then it'll get into anything that you might want to ask questions about as you look at those funding categories again by functional area. So police, fire, emergency management, airport rescue, firefighting. So that's our intent for today. I'm going to kick us off, and then there's going to be a group that will be presenting, and then I'll tie it back to those discussion slides as well. Any questions before we get started?
Questions as we go, that's okay?
Yeah, that's terrific.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, we're going to start a little bit with why we're here. So this was one of the first slides that we looked at during our kickoff, and I'll highlight the area that's your attention today. And that's really, this committee is charged with advising council for November 2026 election. And then again, this those 4 areas that we've been talking about for the last few months. Wanted to call again to the attention kind of where we are in this process. We talked about doing a community survey in January. We've had that pending for a little while because there's 2 options that we can do for the survey. We can ask really general questions, which is what we would have done in January. Get some feedback from this committee, and they can measure the community's perception to some of those ideas. And so that's why we've been holding a little bit. So that still needs to be completed. But the goal is to have that information back to you so that you also have that perspective before you provide a recommendation to council. Again, we're starting our deliberations now in the month of February. Instead of doing the budget retreat updates in conversation with our new city manager, we're actually going to take an update to a council meeting instead of a budget retreat. And so that will be coming up here in March. We'll get that date to you once we get that placed on the calendar. So those 3 highlighted areas are really what we're focusing on right now. Any questions on that? So general fund overview, I believe.
Hi.
Are we presenting from here or should work up?
I was just.
Hopefully this works. So, good afternoon, Heidi Derryberry, the city's budget director. I'm happy to be with you again today. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some general fund overview items, just to kind of bring us back to our second meeting, I believe, is when I presented on a lot of the sources and the expenses that we have in our general fund. So really wanting to, now that you've heard from all the different groups on the needs, kind of just wrap us back to the general fund specifically. We'll talk a little bit about the other funds later. So just as a reminder, in the general fund, you could see we have a number of revenue sources in our general fund with our local taxes and our intergovernmental revenues making up the majority of the revenues in the general fund. And just as a reminder, our local sales tax includes sales tax, or our local taxes include our local sales tax, franchise fees, and excise tax. And then the intergovernmental includes, as you can see, sales, state shared taxes, grants, and other intergovernmental agreements. And those 2 items alone, so sales, the local taxes is 38% of the total general fund resources, and the state share taxes and other intergovernmental is 42%. So we do have a number of other revenues, but there's limited ways that we can increase that. So there is very limited other options for us to increase our taxes. And in recent times, I think we mentioned this, that we've been taking some hits to our state shared revenues due to the Santan Valley Incorporation and things like the Big Beautiful Bill. So those resources that you can see are very important to the general fund have been seeing some reduction. So just a reminder of some other resources that the general fund does have. I wanted to call out in this presentation today that other funds actually do support the general fund. And they do this through cost allocation and transfers in. And I don't think we talked about cost allocation in our first presentations that we did. So just to share, the cost allocation is actually charges to other funds. The annual amount this year is about $6 million. And what this is actually reimbursement, I guess is the best way probably to say it, to the general fund for a lot of our shared services. So management services, so finance and budget and the attorney's office and IT, things like that. So we support the city as a whole. And then through a cost allocation, which we actually hire out a consultant that does this work for us every year. And a portion of that comes back to the general fund. So that's actually a resource that we have offsetting some of the costs that you'll see in the general fund. And then we have transfers in, whether they be ongoing or one time. Really as a resource in a long term is our ongoing transfers, which you can see. The slide is familiar from the first presentation I did. We have a small amount coming in from HERF, or Highway User Revenue Fund, for some right-of-way maintenance, beautification for streetscapes, medians, and right-of-ways. Tourism has a very small ongoing contribution to our 4th of July celebration. And then the recreation, the BBB Recreation Fund, funds about $2.6 million of foots, parks, and recreation operations. So those are resources where you'll see the expenses all in the general fund, but remembering that there are other funds that are contributing to the general fund. And then here is our general fund expenditure overview. So again, I just wanted to remind everybody of the main areas in the general fund. We have a lot of divisions, as you've heard, that are funded in the general fund, but remembering that general administration, fire, and police are actually our 3 largest expenses in the general fund. So police and fire make up over 46% of the total general fund expenditures. And then general administration is another 25%. And as I shared, those are kind of our shared services. So city manager's office, HR, IT, city attorney, municipal court, communication and civic engagement, and management services. So in that general administration number that you see, that's actually 8 different divisions with this. So as we talk about, reallocating resources and what can we do to shift resources, if you look at what's left outside of police and fire and kind of the general administration, there's really not a lot of dollars to really impact shifting for the needs that you've heard over recent weeks.
I have a question.
Sure.
So police at say 27%, fire 20%. What are other municipalities paying from their general fund?
I don't have an average on the top of my head.
From previous presentations, I can pull that up. Do you want me to share it right now?
I mean, if you want to pull the numbers, we
Pull it up why don't you keep going? I'll pull it up and then we can come back to it. Okay.
great. I apologize for not having that right at the tip of my tongue. So here I wanted to talk about just kind of citywide staffing and overall FTEs. So this is actually our 25-26 current FTEs approved. Again, you can see that police, fire, and general administration makes up a big portion of that. And this is actually citywide, so not just general fund. So police and fire currently make up 30% of the total city FTEs. And actually, if we look at it at just general fund, that is 40% of the general fund FTEs sit in the police and fire. And then general administration, again, which I mentioned is that 18 divisions. FTE wise, that's 16% of the general fund budget. This kind of shows that the portion, and I didn't specifically pull out RIP. They're a very small, they're 9 FTE. So they're a small portion of the overall. And then the ARF staff and airport is a small number too. And then as we've talked about, I just wanted to remind everybody that the general fund does support other funds via what we call transfers out. So you can see here that the general fund, so it's transfers out over $10.6 million ongoing to support other funds and operations within the city. Of that, the pension bond fund is actually the largest transfer out we do at over $8 million. And I just want to note that that money is not included in those costs that we just saw for general fund expenditures. So if you add on the cost of the police, fire, and the ARF fire costs for pension, that's another $9 million that the general fund is actually paying for that debt service. So that money's not in police, fire, and the airport. It's shifted to pay the debt through a transfer. So I just wanted to point that out.
Does that have is it gonna end at some point?
It does end in 2040. I was gonna say it's 2040. So it will end in a point, which is good news, but it's still quite a ways out there. And it's a lot, I mean, as you can see, over $8 million a year. And that money used to actually be paid for out of the general fund within the divisions until we did that debt. So we just shifted those costs. So if you're looking at historical and you see a big drop in police and fire budget, that's why. And then the airport fund, we are supporting the airport about $300,000 a year. And that is mainly due to the increased ARF costs that you have heard about when you heard from the airport group. And then we do have some other small ones. We do have a little bit of personnel cost support, $15,000 a year going to our housing and community services fund. We do support our library, our local city libraries, $1.6 million a year. Economic development is for some debt service that actually we have 4 years until that's going to be paid off, and we're looking to hopefully pay it off early and save some money for the city with that. And then sustainability or the SEMS fund, the general fund is currently supporting almost $220,000 a year for personnel for positions that don't qualify for use of the environmental management fund. Sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
Hey, this is Vince. I have a question. I went back to your FY 2025-26 general fund budget overview. And did I hear you correctly saying that this amount, this $10 million plus, it's not really reflected in that fund budget overview?
You're talking about the slide from a couple of go of the expenditures. No, it is not included. Transfers are separate from the expenditures. So this is.
And so where would that lie in terms of the budget? You say it's debt?
The pension bond fund, there's a transfer out of the general fund into our pension bond fund, which is debt. So you see a transfer out of the general fund and a debt expenditure in the debt service fund. Pension debt fund.
Okay, I guess my question is, where specifically in the general fund is that slice of the pie for this amount of the transfers out? Because I'm not seeing it on the budget overview as a transfer out section.
Correct. So the budget overview that I shared is just the expenditures in the general fund. In our 5-year plan, transfers out are actually a separate line.
Okay, but it's still an expense, correct?
It's an yes.
Okay, all right, thanks.
It's not technically an expense, you have to budget for appropriation. Because the expense usually occurs in the other fund that receives those revenues.
It's coming out of the general.
It's coming out of the general fund.
The 5-year
It's an
plan.
expense to, in that aspect, yes, it's an expense to.
Some questions.
Well, she bring it.
I don't know if now is the right time, but the questions about, primary property tax.
We're actually going to talk about primary property tax a bit more today.
Great, because I have some questions about that. You said that the state, I think you're implying that the state shared taxes went down because of
Um,
10 and then the big beauty bill. Can you show us what that, like, how much that's been lost in that category in 2026 or even before that? Because I know the state's not collecting as much taxes anymore because they have that flat tax. So did that impact that funding and by how much?
We did some slides for the council retreat. We could probably can bring up to talk about the state shared revenue impact we're seeing. Some of it is current year because some allocations like state shared sales tax, auto lieu, vehicle registrations, those started pretty much immediately. They started in September. And we've already seen those reductions. Some tax portion, because there's a 2-year delay before we start receiving those distributions, our budget won't see the impacts until not next fiscal year, but the fiscal year after. Just the state shared income tax with the budget, federal budget bill and what the state may do for conformity is about an $800,000 impact annually. There's some growth to offset it, but that's the impact if they accept full tax conformity. These are a little bit lower compared to that.
And then combine that with what you're going to tell me about primary property tax. How that's increasing, we might get an idea of where the deficit is coming from. Obviously, some is outside of the city,
But we're
by the state.
currently in the budget process, so we have not determined that primary property tax are gonna make up any difference at this point. That's a,
I'm just asking
yeah,
questions.
that's a council decision as we bring up the budget.
I was wondering about projections on property taxes. So what's the projected over the next 10 years that we're talking about? What's the projected increase in primary property tax that the city is going to receive?
If we leave it at the current.
If we leave it at the current, no change by council. That's one of the questions I have.
You want to hit that one, Brandon, with property tax?
It's
You wanna-
try to address that as part of the property tax conversation. Yeah.
There's some nuances to it.
Things easy, right? Questions on our transfers out and how the general fund is supporting. You can see there's a number of one-time things. The general fund is helping. It depends on the year of what needs are. That you can see we do support the Housing and Community Services Fund. This particular one is for some housing incentives. The library, they're redoing the windows, and we were just talking about how expensive they are on a residential home. Just imagine the cost on doing the library. So the general fund is contributing to that project. The RIP fund, or the Water Resource Infrastructure Protection Fund, that's our wildland fund. So the general fund is contributing to design of that new facility. And then the capital projects fund, this 3.9 million, this is actually for doing repairs to the USGS facilities. And it is funded by the general fund, but we do have reserves set aside from the revenues, the lease revenues that we receive from those facilities, that are reserved for these kinds of facility improvements. So that's not a direct impact to the general fund. It is coming from the general fund. And then the stormwater fund transfer of almost 4.8 million. This is to support the Rio de Flag project that's currently underway. Sustainability, this is a number of one-time investments in various programs that group is doing. And then the airport fund of the $1.2 million. I think you probably heard some of the needs, but a lot of this is maintenance needs and requirements of the FAA, things that we needed to do at the airport. So the airport doesn't have enough money to pay for them, so the general fund is infusing some money in there for those safety improvements. This is the kind of general fund recap. Any questions?
Slides from the retreat. I have this on my computer.
The
If you know what you want to share.
sure revenue stuff. It's not that one. That's,
The chart. Like the red writing, side right, Rich?
I didn't go.
Let's keep going.
Oh, gosh, that one.
All right.
Is that what we want to share?
Is that what you wanted, Rick, or no?
Sure, if you want to talk about tax conformity and refresh my memories on what I spoke to council with.
You were able to find that other chart? Or do you want me to still pull that one up as well?
Thank you. What's the next slide? Here's where I walk through it. It's making it a little complex. So what I did is I looked at our state shared income taxes. That's the one that has the biggest hit that we'll see from tax conformity. A little bit of a hit related to Santan Valley. So my initial look at where our projections were coming into this budget year for next budget cycle. The orange line demonstrates where our budget was set in the current process over the next 5 years. Then I rolled in, new estimates, impacts related to Santan Valley, impacts to tax conformity, and so forth. So we actually we're doing a lot better on state shared income taxes than what we had projected in our 5-year plans, 10-year plans. So we actually were anticipating good growth in the gray, I think that's gray line, I can't see well, from here. Just saw some good revenue growth from income tax based on what the state has collected. And you can see a couple years out is when we really see those gains. Next slide steps you through what happens with the Santan Valley annexation. So because they're taking a piece of that pie, or they're actually being added to the pie, and our slice becomes smaller, here you can see that it does create an impact below what our projections would have been for that reallocation of those income tax revenues. And I've got numbers in a different spot. I don't have that number specifically at this point. So that was a small impact, but we're still ahead of a budget and what we had adopted. The next one is where we start rolling in a couple other decisions. As you know, the governor provided her perspective at her opening comments that she'd like to see tax conforming on the personal income tax side versus the corporate side. So she was focusing on that when she did her budget announcement. And based on her tax conformity recommendation and how that rolls into our impacts, you can see it hit us quite a bit more than Santan Valley did. And it was starting to bring our projections lower than what we had in our 5-year, 10-year plan. The number from the blue to the yellow was about 400,000 impact from just one piece of the tax conformity. Then we hit the next slide. this one layers in the other one, and the legislators presented a bill to the governor that they recommend and they would like to have adopted, which is pretty much full tax conforming. There's some nuances there. And so now we layer in that green line is where that bill, if adopted by the governor, would have an impact on our revenue. So now we're seeing another 400,000 impact to our state shared revenues. And overall, we're about 850,000 impact based on whatever decision they come up with. And so we're building a budget, trying to make sure we're planning ahead for this. Had we had these revenues, we could have done a lot of good things, but we're going to be proactive and budget within the resources we get.
Curious about all of this, and I think it's really important to know, especially in your position, you got to keep track of a million different things. For any of us sitting here, 400,000 or 800,000 is a lot of money relative to a $550 million budget or $35 million of state shared tax. I'm just wondering how germane it is for the conversation.
It's not germane. It's just really is going to restrict what we can do over the next few years. It's really
Talking about, and here we're talking about $400,000 or $800,000. It just seems like a important but relatively small in comparison.
in comparison to the needs that we have.
Yeah, and in
Yeah, if you look
comparison
at
to the budget.
Mhm.
I mean, if you told me I'm losing 2% or something, like, it's important, but it's, I don't know, just doesn't seem like as big of a deal as maybe it's being presented.
How would you quantify that in relation to the actual budget?
I don't have that in my, I don't have it in my head.
Has like the negative, what, 1.1? Here. Wait, I'm gonna scroll real quick.
Digging in a lot of slides we put in there.
This one here?
That was sales tax only.
Okay, that's what I was thinking of.
No, this is only general sales tax.
We have this one that has the overall,
So general sales tax side, part of this is impacts. These are local sales tax. So these are not impacts related to any budget bills or valley and those kind of things. These are our direct revenues. In this first half of the year, we've seen some areas struggle within our collections of revenues, not meeting our budget projections and where we're going forward. Wasn't planning on going through all these, but overall, right now, we're looking at our revenues in the current fiscal year being about 400,000 below what we've had in our budget system as we're projecting forward. So that's an ongoing impact we will see in our budget process here. So there's another layer of revenue concerns. This number did improve when we got our January returns. But I can't remember what it improved to, but it was a pretty good growth in January that actually bumped that up. I would say another 150,000 less. You know, we're getting closer. And if we continue to be strong for this second half of the year, we could meet those budget projections.
That's
Just local sales tax.
at least for one category.
Can you read it off? I can't see.
It's a negative 1.2%
Sales tax.
for the local sales tax. So that kind of gets to some of the, you know, what portion of the pie are we talking?
It's negative 1.2% this year or or under projections?
Projection.
Tell us how much tax grows every year.
We look at each category a little bit differently. But in general, it's about a 3%, a little bit less, 2.8% growth overall for city general fund sales taxes. But some categories we recognize, construction contracting being volatile, those kind of things are a little bit lower in growth. But that's kind of where we project.
There's a chart, I think, that's coming up. Some of those numbers out for you as well.
I think that's rates that'll break out.
I think it was also.
So, expanding city limits. There's more area coverage so that we can get additional revenue into the city itself.
And part of that, we are talking about expanding south of I-40 with JW Powell from the airport up to 4th Street. So that's kind of a growth area that will help us out in the future. But annexing other areas, Donny Park, whatever you want to go to, I haven't had any conversations on that kind of stuff. And that takes a voter process. The voters have to approve something like that, like Santan Valley did. You gotta get buy-in.
But there's been no surveys or studies done looking at financial impacts, trying
And there
to
could be,
look at something.
yeah, and there could be positive and negative impacts by bringing another portion of the community area into our city. You know, now we've got their infrastructure we got to maintain. Now we've got to respond to, so no studies done. Just say that. Now, oh. What's that?
Are we done with this one?
I think so.
The other.
All right, the next couple sections, we're gonna talk about resources. You know, as we go through the next few weeks with your discussions and how we can balance the equation of public safety improvements or public safety needs. We wanted to bring some of those resources that we'll put in our toolbox to talk about as we move forward. Always keeping in mind the color of money. These are resources that are really general fund resources that could be used based on council adoption or voter approval for us to consider over the next few weeks. And we break these into two separate categories, one-time resources and ongoing resources. We do that specifically because we know that when you it doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to have that revenue source going forward. You're going to bond, you're going to build something, and the revenue goes away. Those kind of things versus you increase a sales tax rate, you now have that as an ongoing revenue in your scenario. So that's the reason we kind of break out one time and ongoings. We'll have recap at the end as far as how we use those and look to use those in our equations this year. Oops. Got a tag team with Brandy on this one. So development impact fees, these are fees that are developers pay when they pull permits to do construction and building in our community. Currently, we're under the review of these development fees. We're required to do them every 5 years per state law. So we are reviewing those, but we won't have those to council until after November, most likely calendar year 2027, early next year. It's quite a lengthy process. There's a lot of notifications we have to do. And we believe that, you know, decisions you make may have an impact of where we go with development fees, you know, how much we need to grow there. So I think the timing on that one's very good. But we have a current fee already in place that will help support some of these asks that we're seeing for capital projects. We'll layer those in as we bring a financial model together. We're looking at different tiers and modeling that we can help on the fly as you make decisions. But we'll use those revenues only to provide for those growth-related expenditures. We can't just say we're going to replace vehicles. It really has to be a new expenditure based on growth and impacts there. It's not for operating. It's not for personnel. You don't use development fees for that. Generally, it's buildings, vehicles, and communication equipment, but new ones. And it's not always 100% of the building per se, because there's already growth that has made an impact to put a facility in place. So it's the proportionate shares what development fees will cover as we go through that process. So that's one that we'll work through the next few weeks with you. The next one is our, oh, I've got it. And get up and change it.
Handed over the green.
Keep it in mind. Secondary property tax and general obligation bonds. We've been pretty successful with issuing general obligation bonds to build facilities, pay for items in our community. After our last election, we set a policy that we told the voters that we will do our best to maintain a rate at 0.8 or lower during the life of those bonds. We're very successful at. We're currently meeting those commitments. If there's an instance where secondary values go down, appraised values go down, but we still have debt to pay, we could actually increase. We have to pay the debt. Unlikely that we'll see that, but just a nuance that we could have a rate higher some year if there's the current economy that causes it. And so based on our current policy level that we've had for many years, we do have capacity over the next 20 some years. We'll issue debt for 20-year purposes. About $100 million in capacity to build things, to fund one-time items. I would never recommend going in 1 year to spend it all or ask voters for this large of an amount. But it's something we could use a portion of to fund some of these facilities or vehicles or equipment that you may see or that you've heard about as a need in our public safety areas. General obligation bonds and the voters go any November. So we'll talk whether we do that this November or the next November, if that is one of the components to help with public safety funding. Again, for one-time needs, we still have some authorized but not issued. So we'll be issuing more debt over the next year as we go. So that helps us maintain that rate. And then every year that we don't go to the voters and start a new project or so forth, it adds another 10 million every time you wait a little bit longer. So it's not like that's the only window. It kind of moves as years move on. And also, we could go back and ask, if you do want to do more, you could have a higher rate and fund more than what we have up here in 100 million. This is just our policy level today that we have. And just one note, because we're in a good spot with the debt that we're managing and the capacity, there may be a slight decrease of that rate that we're analyzing and looking at. We're going to pay off some debt this year, cash, which is great. And with rates coming down, we've got ability to really manage our debt a little bit better, maybe under a lower rate. Maybe a conversation with primary property tax. We're reducing one, we're adding the other. We're having that conversation with council. Was at the retreat as a thought. But we'll have more conversations in April with the council, whether they want to do that. So that's another one-time resource that we'll use in our toolbox. Does require voter approval. It's a graphic.
Sorry, quick questions back to that slide, if you don't mind. Just to make sure I understand, secondary property taxes only for general obligation bonds.
Only thing we can use it for.
Issued. You're saying earlier. So it's essentially pledged. It's just waiting to pull the trigger at the right time. So we can spend it again.
Correct. Correct. Voters said, yes, you can do these projects. We haven't issued all the infrastructure debt. We haven't issued all the wastewater debt. Housing debt. Those are those outstanding ones. Yeah, we can't issue it twice. And we don't want to issue too early because we're going to start paying interest too early on that. So here's the graphic just showing how we layer debt to try and maintain that 0.8 rate. And we have a hand up. A question, Vince?
Oh, I was just going to say that we lost audio on that question. All I heard was a buzz, buzz, buzz.
Oh. So the question was on the previous slide. We get back there. The bullet about authorized but unissued geo debt. That's for items that we already had approved by voters. It's not any new debt that we're going to issue. We're going to issue based what we were approved for so far. And so this is just a graphical look as far as how we try and manage and keep that rate to that 0.8 per 100 net assessed valuation. You can see we're starting to pay off a lot of our current debt. We have this new debt. We're going to issue this new debt to keep it up, maintain this rate for the next several years. And then as we go to voters, have new debt authorized, we'll layer that into this model also to maintain the rate. So that's how we get that capacity of almost 100 million. That's all I have for those two. I'm just going to hand it over to Randy.
From other funding sources, one-time funding sources, you had talked about the development impact fees. This time you had talked in November, you said there's a amount of 4.5 million that's been accumulated in that fund. Impact fees. Is that something that we would have access to or discuss, use for one-time building out of public safety stuff?
Yes.
The other fund that you talked about was an accumulated fund for the pension. You talked about it, $16 million right now. And it's a fund that you're holding, a reserve fund that you're holding in the event something happens. It sounds like you got about 2 years in there if you're paying $8 million each year. Is that a fund that we could get into to fund one-time fire stations or police stations to drop that down to maybe a 1 year type of?
That is tied to an ordinance that adopted the contingency reserve policy when we went to issue the debt. Because we want to assure that we don't get back into the become an unfunded scenario. So we have a contingency policy that says we will maintain certain reserve levels throughout the years. We'll use it only for paying into the public safety pension program. And that's what that's used for. And then we got to replenish it as it's drawn down. It's not to say that council can't do an ordinance that reverses that and puts us in a financial ability to use that, but I would be concerned about the risk of us going back into being unfunded again.
You talked about back in November was the 20% general fund balance that's kept in reserve. Can we get into that?
No.
You said you could, because in COVID you got down to 10%, you said, so we could get it if needed.
Usually it's for emergency purposes. Bond rating agents really frown if you start operating at those types of things. It's really only a one-time. I wouldn't really fund operations per se.
Yeah, I'm just looking more for those one-time
One
things
time.
that we saw that we were presented with one-time type of expenditures. Differently funding those ones.
Hey, look at that. I would not recommend going below 20. It really keeps us as a strong, especially as you're seeing these dips in revenues, tax conformity, that helps maintain those 20. Well, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
It went, yeah, my talking points are on my computers.
And confirm with those online that you can hear us again.
Yes, we can hear you, but the volume does go in and out.
So just make sure that we're speaking up. The speaker is right, that box right there. So if you can kind of project to that area, that will help those online make sure they can hear you. Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon, Brandy Suda. I am the finance director for the city. I think this is my first time in front of this committee presenting to you. So, but I'm going to hit on a few other, start talking about one last one-time resource available, and then go into some ongoing resource. So the city is and has been very successful in obtaining grants to help support special programming, capital projects. And we regularly leverage these grants to help deliver needed services in our community. For example, Spruce Wash, we got a number of grants to be able to complete that full suite of projects and so forth. So we definitely work really hard and are very successful. Stacy and her team are amazing at getting us millions and millions of dollars in grants to help city dollars. However, there are very, very few grants that can be used to fund operations or that are ongoing in nature. The city policy is that we treat grants as one-time resources unless there's a long history of recurring funding or entitlement funding. So again, we don't normally use grant money to fund positions. We have a few positions that are currently funded with grants, but we've had those grants for the 18 years that I've been with the city. We have received those grants year over year. And while there are numerous grants for special operations or training for police and fire, there are very few for day-to-day operations. However, we do have two staffing grants. We have SAFER and COPS hiring that are on the screen there that help fund additional firefighters or police officers. So these are additional FTEs. These grants we can apply for to help cover the cost of the additional staffing, at least initially, for both within fire and police. And we have applied for these grants in the past, and we have been successful in receiving them. But we also do need an ongoing resource once the grant expires, so we can continue to fund those additional staff. So we do have a COPS hiring grant. It covers 75% of the cost of each new hired officer for up to 3 years. But it is limited to $125,000 per officer. So that does not get us 3 years. That'll probably get us a couple years. Yes, you can apply for, I don't know the largest number, but I have seen in recent awards like 50, large numbers of officers. I think the last time we applied for 4.
Or can it be replacement officers for cops and SAFER?
It has to be new, so it has to be additions.
Increased staffing.
Yes, increased staffing. And then we also have the SAFER grant. This covers 50% of the cost of newly hired firefighters for the first 2 years, and then 35% in the 3rd year. Again, I think we've gotten this grant twice, Stacey? Twice. I think we've gotten a total of 12 firefighters from this grant in the past. We also have other, we are always looking for other grants as well, including direct state appropriations to fund other one-time needs. For example, for state appropriations, we did receive $4 million of state appropriations for the new wildland training facility. We also actively are looking for grants to fund the many needs of EM, which includes, either EM plans or large-scale events.
Who's the issuing agency for those 2 grants?
Which ones?
Federal money, state money, cops?
That's federal money for those 2, both the COPS and the SAFE. FEMA? Is it? Okay. Oops. Any other questions on grants? Moving on into slides on some ongoing revenues and resources that are available. To John's question earlier, an $800,000 hit to the general fund, right? We have about a little over $86 million of ongoing resources coming into the general fund annually. So yeah, it's probably about 1%. Unfortunately, what we see is most of our revenues are not, like all the other revenues are not growing, right? So we're not seeing our other resources growing, like our user fees we haven't seen much increase in the user fees. We're working on we're working on user rate studies, but those have been fairly flat. So a couple of our big revenue growth opportunities in the general fund when it comes is sales tax, state shared income taxes, and very little on property taxes. So we don't really see a lot of growth in some of those other revenues that were in that slide earlier. So while yes, I do agree, it's a very small 1% of the overall budget. There's just not really any other revenues to offset the 1%. So one ongoing resource that we have in the general fund is our primary property tax levy. It is unrestricted in use. So right now it goes to help support general fund operations overall. The rate is adopted by council that imposes the levy, right? So they decide what that levy is and adopt that annually. But the state restricts the annual increase in the levy to 2%. So when you look at that, that's about a little over $120,000 increase per year, maybe a little bit more. Even if we increase our levy by the state allowed 2%, it only grows our revenue approximately $120,000 to $150,000 a year. However, we have not increased our primary property tax levy for the last 6 years. And coming on with fiscal year 27, it'll be the 7th year. So we have actually capacity of 14% to increase our levy by, we're allowed to by state, which is approximately just a little over $1 million right now. To the other question about primary property tax growth, the other component of that growth is new construction, right? So the levy, the limit of 2% is outside of new construction. What I have seen as I've been working on the 5-year plan for the general fund, we see maybe $50,000 to $100,000 in new primary property tax revenue a year due to new construction. So very little. Again, very little growth that we can count on each year related to new construction.
You can't raise it 14% in 1 year. You have 14% capacity and it can be 2% for the next 7 years from here forward.
We could,
14%.
we are allowed to do it up to 14%. I think once we get to that 15%, there's some additional requirements that we have to follow, but we can.
For full disclosure, I've always struggled with property tax, so forgive my ignorance. But if I'm looking at this right, 2018 to 2019 or thereabouts, the primary property tax levy rate is slightly decreased.
Yes,
Is that right?
that's correct.
I'm curious how that happens. Does council make a direct action to allow it to decrease?
Yes.
And if they just left it alone, it would just stay at the same rate?
No, so, right, so the rate is based on assessed values, which are determined by the county assessor, and our limit that for the levy. So the 2% is a levy, which is an amount, meaning we can collect 2% more revenue than we collected the year before. So 2%, right? And most people will see we're limited, limited value, property assessed values can increase only up to 5% a year. So right now, there's a big gap between full cash value of people's property and limited cash value. So most properties are seeing close to a 5% increase on their assessed value every year. If we're keeping our levy flat, that means the rate has to go down, right? On average, every single property owners will be different, slightly different. So I'm just going to put that disclosure in there. So their rates are the rate is going to go down, though in theory, it should be relatively the same amount of taxes. Levy. Does that?
What I'm trying to understand is I feel like there's been money left on the table there. And every year it's a little bit more. So if you look out over the last 10 years,
Mhm.
now all of a sudden, maybe it's $1 million or $2 million a year.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of trying to understand that choice. I mean, I feel like somewhere there was a choice that allowed that to happen, right?
Yep, that's at the council level. We talk about it every year during the budget process to see if they are interested in funding additional items or increasing that.
Sorry, Brian, I'm gonna ask this in a different way.
Yeah, no, please do, because it's,
Pass a levy saying we're gonna generate $1 million.
Yep.
And there's 1,000 new homes that are built. That cost and that burden is for still $1 million going forward, and it's just being paid by more people, so that's why it's decreasing. Is that the wrong way?
no, that's because new construction is outside of the 2% that we can collect. So So it does allow us to collect additional revenues for that new construction. What I'm seeing though, based on history, is that new construction, while it seems like there's a lot going on, it's only producing $50,000 to $100,000 worth of revenue every year. That new construction that's coming onto the tax rolls each year. And that usually takes a couple years, right? Because by the time the building is built and the assessor, and it goes through the process, it takes about 2 years for those properties to come onto the tax roll.
I feel like I need to ask this question to council, but I'm looking for maybe a little combined wisdom of the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 councils. What was the logic for essentially leaving that money on the table as inflation's growing and these public safety needs are growing? Like, was there any articulated, hey, we're gonna intentionally let this go down because ...
Well, we're not letting it go down. We're just not taking advantage of the capacity. And it just varies council to council, you know. There was another time we were down 14%. We used that capacity to add fire and police positions. And then we increased the levy another year, but then as councils change, they have different thoughts of opinions as far as should revenue. And under the guidance of our city managers at the time and work with council, we build a budget that is reflecting what they want to see. We always share what it means as far as adding these revenues and they could use it for any general fund purposes. We share that data, but in the end, it's the policymaker's decision.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Any other questions about property taxes? It's complicated. I could probably try to communicate it 5 different ways and it still would be difficult to understand. So thank you. So again, council can direct to increase this tax, right? We would have to follow the truth in tax requirements for the tax adoption. But that is an option. And then I just added, you know, who pays, right? So this is property owners within city limits are paying these taxes. They may choose to pass it on to renters or customers, but that is ultimately who ends up paying those taxes. Yeah.
14% increase sounds like a large amount when you put that in front of a voter, right in front of them. Right there.
Yeah.
Saying, Rick, that previously we've had something where we were short percentage like this. How did the voters take it when it was enacted by city council to put that large of an increase?
So
When was that done?
So separating what voters get to approve and what council approves. Primary property tax is in the control of council within the state limits. So we didn't go to voters and say, hey, we're gonna raise 7% a year for a couple of years. It was a council decision. Voters didn't choose.
But the voters choose the
What
county.
was there?
True.
So they do
In
get
the
to
community,
decide.
was there people that were upset due to?
I assume there's some upset.
Of course, but it wasn't a
But the
large.
purpose of us doing it was to get 12 more positions for public safety. You know, we provided the real main purpose that we wanted to fund and use this capacity. So I think the way we put it out there, explain the why, I think we pretty much had full support of the council at the time to go and do that because positions were important. Public safety. So I think there was some maybe pushback, but I think in general, we were okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You said if we went up to 14%, that would only generate $1 million?
Yes,
But still tiny little bits of money.
it is a small amount, but it is ongoing.
That's an annual, so that's a fair amount of positions that we're able to fill.
It would give us 10 million over 10 years.
Yep, 10 million for 10 years, yes.
See the 2%.
I'm just trying to, I recognize that there are some other ongoing resources that you're gonna mention, but in this conversation, I'm curious, so if that's a 14% increase, only generating $1 million or so dollars, and we're looking at a 75 million or so dollar gap for the public safety, like what's the relative percentage of impact on a city resident? compared with the impact of this? And you might not be able to generate that off the top of your head, but I'm curious how these things.
Surprised if Rick's got this number.
Yeah.
on
I've
his-
been playing.
We have a
with
spreadsheet
for
that-
purposes, but this will be ballparking, but we can bring back scenarios for what does a 2% mean? What does a 2% mean? We can bring back some of those scenarios, impacts to commercial and residential customers. But in general, looking at the, residential side, a 2% levy on $100,000 property is about a $3 impact. Now, no one has $100,000 property, so
2%.
2% levy,
Okay.
ballpark.
So a
It's about
14% is like $30, whatever. Who knows?
Right.
7 times more.
And then times the value of your house times.
Yes, yes.
Okay, but yeah,
500,000.
5 times 7.
okay. Yeah, I'm following.
And we could bring those scenarios back if we're gonna look at that as far as our conversation.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
So you mentioned that if we go to 15%, that there some rules change. Is it in the best interest of the city to keep it below the 15%?
I think what is required is that we have to, I'm trying to remember, I'm gonna have to get back to you on exactly what the requirements are. But there's some additional steps that council needs to take in order to approve something over 15%.
So it's not different rules at over 15. It's just if you went up the entire 15%.
Yes, when you go.
You go up 14% one year and then add 2% next year, add 2 for the next year.
These being unrestricted uses, though, that money could change with the new council. If that money was adopted and it was for 12 new, positions, a new council could say, no, we want to for 12 new positions, not public
They'd
safety.
have to cut staff.
Yeah.
Which would not be. But you're right.
You're right.
Future
It is
council-
unrestricted if it's in the
Every year,
general fund.
year's budget is adopted by a new council opinions.
Turn it back. Talk about user fees.
And then you'll be back soon, right?
It will be.
Oh, darn it.
That's okay.
All right. So user fee is also one of those resources we have in our general fund. It's an ongoing resource. These are fees that are passed on to the people using certain services and programs within the city of Flagstaff. User fees are adopted by council. So council sets the rates and the fees for us as we bring reports back. Good news is that recently we had council adopt a citywide cost recovery policy. Prior to this, we really had no guidelines and no determination of what we're going to recover in our user fees over time. In fact, it's been many years since we even looked at revenues related to user fees because we didn't start a policy that would have us refresh this on a timely basis. So now we got a policy in place that sets that every 5 years, we're going to touch every user fee, every rate within the organization. At least do a review, share with council what the proposed or recommended rates and fees are. Still, it's up to council to adopt them. Council does the adoption. They choose those at the time. Our policy for cost recovery in the general fund, it ranges from, we're not going to recover costs on a special event. We're going to fund those kind of things, to we're going to charge 100% for a building permit on those kind of things. So cost recovery is kind of, does it benefit the community or is it benefit the individual that's going to receive that service? So there's different layers as far as where the cost recovery targets are within the general fund. Overall, in our general fund, license permits, user fees, and so forth, we have about $6.3 million annual revenues in this category. So, looking at that, every a 10% increase, 600,000, not likely that we would actually do a across the board increase because we've got to do studies. It is required for us to actually do a rate study, explain, show the cost of the programs, because we cannot recover above what we show the cost is. We can't say, yeah, here's the cost of it, but we're gonna collect another $100,000 to fund something. There's mandatory levels that we sit with. So with the new policy, you can see on the right-hand side is our calendar as far as when we're gonna start bringing rates forward. And it's kind of based on the one has been not looked at for the longest period of time to the most recent ones. This doesn't include like enterprise funds. This is just the general fund ones we have here. So we'll be going through this process over the next 5 years. We don't have revenue estimates at this point, but this is a resource that generally we use during a budget process if we do gain based on rates and fees adopted by council. It just as within public safety, police and fire, those are about 700,000 fees. That's for inspection permits, fingerprinting, dispatch fees and those kind of things. So there's a small amount that's related to public safety. Now we're going to move away from the general fund and talk about other funds and citywide opportunities. You heard from our wildland fire management group a few weeks ago. And right now their program is supported by the Water Resource and Infrastructure Protection Fee that is on your municipal bill. We went through a process and adopted a fee, a rate to support this program in 2020. And this really all goes to wildland fire management. Prior to that, it was just a mix of general fund. We'd find grants that we can get some work done. Bonds, we went out for bonds. But it was really a seasonal program because we didn't really have an ongoing resource annually. So you heard about their program, the great work that this revenue source is doing. Currently, it is 0.53 per 1,000 gallons on your water bill. And there's been that rate since 2020. So this is one area where we're going to rate study on this in a couple of years. We haven't put this in the program yet. But the 0.53 gets us about 1.27 million. And really every municipal bill player puts into this protection fund. It's really about protecting our wastewater, water infrastructure in our community.
Does this fund sunset? Or does?
No.
Oh, perpetuity.
No, there's a fee set for council. It'll stay until they decide to get rid of it, or, if we move stuff to the bond, or to a different tax, we can sunset it or what have you, but nothing today. One of our other funds in the public safety conversations, our airport fund, talking about aircraft rescue firefighting. Trying hard to become a self-supported fund, an enterprise fund. We were there for just a little bit. Circumstances have changed, costs have increased. They've gone through a lot of great work. They work to bring in the Northern Arizona Technology Park, which will be land lease revenues coming into the airport. Once they start building and leasing that areas, it'll grow from about 400,000 a year, starting in 2028, approximately up to $1 million over time. So they're really making that effort, but today they don't have the resource to fund what they require. We implemented increased badging fee, the new badging fee, and increased parking fees recently. Another 130,000 revenues there. The airport cafe is open. Come join enjoy the cafe that we now have at the airport. There's a visitor center there also for people enjoying the airport and flying Flagstaff. But that's not where we're ending. Been working with Brian Gall and his team to really look at other revenues throughout the airport. Looking at landing fees is one of the important ones we want to address and maybe look at that rate. Passenger facility charge, we're currently working on an application. The importance of that one is it helps pay for our match of capital projects. That's a restricted resource that we have to help when the airport puts a expansion on or the snow removal building. As we build that, we use passenger facility charge to pay the city match for those construction projects. Landing fees, that's based on, touchdown and so forth. Hangar expansion program, we got a couple properties where we're looking at is one we may, an internal fence that we may build and rent out, or we're looking at a private partnership to build and do a land lease for them to provide revenues for the airport. So we're looking at those ideas. Jet fuel tax is a transaction privilege tax that's allowed for airports to implement and provide. So in this coming year. And the last one is a customer facility charge. This is a charge on your rental cars, which really just goes back to rental car infrastructure improvements for those businesses. We've hired a consultant. We're working with a consultant to bring those back, and as we develop those, we'll bring those to council. So we're trying to make the steps to make the airport more self-sustaining over the long run. But there's still gaps in need for our public safety side. And then we're back to transaction privilege tax.
So the last ongoing resource we're going to talk about today is transaction privilege tax. This is known as sales tax. It does require voter approval through a ballot measure. It can be a dedicated resource or an unrestricted resource. We can also set a sunset or not have a sunset on a transaction privilege tax. Currently, all of cities TPT taxes do have an expiration date. Half of the Arizona cities have a tax of greater than 3% or 3% or greater. And about 1% tax produces about $30 million. Usually it, is a fee that is generally passed on to the consumer. And visitors outside of Flagstaff and the surrounding area pay about 37% based on the latest study, pay that tax of that. As well as the surrounding community also supports that tax, right? So those that are in, Donny Park or Kachina, if they are doing business in the city or making purchases in the city, they are also paying the tax. So currently, as of this current fiscal year, we have our 1% TPT tax that expires in 2035. So that it does currently go to the general fund for support of all city or all general fund operations. We have our 2% BBB tax that was just renewed by the voters and goes until 2043. We have a transportation tax of 0.426, and that was adopted a few years ago and expires in 2041. We have our road repair street safety tax. So this is kind of our overlay program to do a lot of maintenance within city roads. That tax is a 0.33 and that expires in 2034. We also have Lone Tree or our Route 66 Butler overpass tax, which is 0.23. And that tax is set to expire in 2039. And lastly, the last update that we had was our transit tax that was recently approved by the voters at 0.5%, and that tax goes until 2040. So you can see the city's total tax, just the base rate is 2.486. With BBB, it's 4.486. And when you add the Coconino County as well as the state sales tax, our overall rate for just our base rate is 9.386. And with BBB, it's 11.386. Questions? Some of those details. I do have a that shows.
I think you're getting to it. So.
Okay. Yep. So you can see here is just based on city rates and a comparison of city rates across Arizona. You can see where we are in that orange color. So we're kind of, towards the lower end for these. I think there's 42 cities that we pulled the data for to show where we are in comparison. However, when you do look at their total tax rate, including the county and the state, we are much further, up to, I think, I'm not sure what, I didn't count where we are, but we are definitely in that top third, of those cities. What, okay, go ahead. Yep.
So I think Shannon had put, one of my questions was about the hotel tax, and it looked like Flagstaff was very low in hotel tax. And I'm intrigued by that because it seems like a potential to help the folks that are visiting Flagstaff pay for public safety, since they tend to use a lot of the same services that residents are using as well. What would that generate for each percent in hotel tax increase? How much are we looking annually to generate?
Rick can pull up that data. There is some state statute restrictions on what we can use. If we increase our hotel tax, what we can use that tax for. So the state has put some restrictions that I think it needs to go back to tourism, if I understand correctly.
Public safety is not one.
No.
That seems odd to me, because it seems like a lot of our discussion was about increase in the height of buildings and hotels, and if you can't use it for public safety, that would.
Rick probably has a lot more details on the limits.
I still gotta look up the total revenue that we're getting from the 2%, but our existing 2% rates kind of grandfathered in, but if we do it increase, that amount has to go to tourism industry. Legal opinion on it. Could we like increase the rate, give that to tourism and reallocate the rest to other needs of the community? Possibly. I have to get a legal opinion on it, but that's where I could see we could shift. We could research that more, but I don't know how good of a sell that would be.
I guess it would be nice to know if it's a smaller amount that's not the rate, I think is what we got brought up. Like, I don't know, are we talking millions? Are we talking thousands of dollars? But it seemed to me that that would be a great number to have if it's a number that's decent.
So the question is, what does hotel sales tax?
Each percent increase, and I think they were down at like 4% if I looked, and that which was really low for a tourism-based economy.
Well, I think if I might, and correct me if this is not what you're getting at, but if we had a hotel tax that was separate.
Yes.
I mean, right now, BBB lumps restaurant, bars and lodging together. So do we have a breakdown of that revenue? And then if so, I think that gets to your question. And then what are what's on it legally?
From the current 2%,
This is what you're talking about is the hotel sales tax.
Yeah, that was the one that you had put on there.
okay,
That's not a 4%.
the current 2% of revenues bring in about 12 million, 12.6 million to the BBB funds, all the funds that use those resources. 2/3 of that is from restaurants and bars, and 1/3 is from hotels.
So a third of 12.6 million.
Yeah.
We're looking at for 2%.
4 million.
These are fast, a lot faster with numbers than I am.
Sometimes, usually I need a calculator because I can't do it in my head anymore.
So you're saying if we just increase the hotel one, not the restaurant one, just the
Correct.
hotel one, to another 2% and bring another 4 million.
Because I mean, I look at 4% and I could see it going to 15%. You go to Hawaii and I think it's 18%. That would be a huge maker to help with some of these expenses.
Tucson just did this. They did it to fill the deep deficits in their general fund. That's what the newspaper article said.
17.9% their total combined for hotels. So there's a lot of cities in the states that are breaking it differently than we do. I'd like to pivot slightly if we can back to the graphs that you had, because I think you were trying to move on beyond those in the relative city sales tax as it relates to other communities. And I think it's worth pointing out, can we go back to that previous graph if you don't mind? that while we look like we're on the lower end for our basic city sales tax, when you add BBB on top of that, suddenly we're at the top, highest, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5. And as someone that's part of the hospitality industry, has a lot of friends and colleagues that are part of the hospitality industry, is on the receiving end of comments from a lot of customers. And as the only city in that list of the state of the higher restaurant and beverage tax rates that has the highest minimum wage, we're starting to get to the point of price refusal. Seeing far more tourists or fewer locals. And so I just want to put that concept out there as we talk about sales tax. I think in addition to looking at the basic sales tax, we also need to include and look at that restaurant and beverage part of our economy. And at what point does that whole thing just kind of crash down because consumers are like, I ain't going to that place. I'm going somewhere else. Or even as locals, I'm like, I might go out once a month as opposed to once a week or twice a week. Price refusal is real. And I just want to point out, we're already really high up on that.
I think that's an excellent point that you're bringing up, because if we're going too high on the scale, we can collapse businesses that we've seen a lot of local businesses go down already. And we don't want to encourage more of that type of dissolvement through the community of getting away from supporting our economy from within at the same time. And then we lose out on total revenue. Too much increases.
People online able to see the
John, if you said
presentation?
it was just on the
No.
hotel.
We don't see the presentation anymore, Brandy.
Thank you, Heidi.
Hey, Brandy, can I add to the conversation since I deal with tourism? So there's a legislation called HB 2950 TIA, and I put it in the chat that has been currently looked at to establish that hotel tax that you're talking about. And most of the cities that were involved in establishing that were Phoenix and Scottsdale. And reason is they already don't have a BBB tax. And so they were trying to find another mechanism. And so we can send you that information out so that the group here has more information regarding the conversation. But there's a big difference when you're establishing something like that if you don't already have something. And so the BBB that we have is intact. If it got passed by legislation, it doesn't mean that our hoteliers would have to agree to it either. So I just want you to keep that in mind. But I can send that article to Shannon, and Shannon could send it out to the group if you want to do a little bit more reading on it. And I will agree with John Van Lanningham that the minimum wage being $2 higher than the rest of the state is causing another impact to those tourism businesses. So again, you keep adding and adding and adding. And what will happen is not only will the local who's already stopped going out continue to really not go, but you will see visitors starting to talk about us as being too high of a city to come visit. So these are some of the things you have to balance. Thank you.
Heidi, why would they hoteliers not have the option not to agree to it?
I have to look that up, but I was told by the Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association that is something that they would have to look at since we already have the BDB established. I'll get that information and send it to Shannon so you feel like you have all of it in front of you.
If it was nuanced apart, so you didn't see it in still get the same. I mean, it does have an effect, but you still get the pushback, you think?
I mean,
'Cause
potentially.
It's still the cost of the visit.
Sure. I think you make a good point there. I can't speak from the perspective of a hotelier because I don't live in that world. So I'm kind of myopic to the restaurant and bar. But yeah, if you're a tourist or a family coming to spend a weekend, I mean, at the end of the day, you spend it here, here, and here. It's kind of the combined total. Just like on the restaurant bill, people care less about how it's broken down. than the total that they get to. And when they start hollering at us and I have to point out, it's like, well, you know,
Other sources of revenue, how much does NAU pay for property tax and how much do they pay for city sales tax for NAU property?
No property tax.
So I guess my question is, if we're providing services to a city within it, take these services, why are we not billing NAU, getting contract reimbursement, those services? 18,000 people.
I don't know if we're allowed to bill the state for our public safety.
I would imagine maybe, I don't know if Chief Gaylor can talk to this. Does Tempe, I believe, bills DSU for fire protection? Because there's no mutual aid agreement in fire, because they don't have a fire department. Police, I get mutual aid.
I need to come up close. They can hear you online.
I have inquired into that issue before. It comes up, you know, like, it's a big burden. It's a tremendous risk to have to protect. And so we've looked into it. The only thing I've seen is, there is a historical arrangement with, U of A, where there's about a 6-figure annual contribution. And Tempe gets nothing, and I'm not aware of any of them, billing for services on campus. And I'll double check that.
Well, and I understand the students bring a lot of economy into, I get that, but it just seems to me that we're providing, you know, I pay property taxes, they don't pay property taxes for public safety.
That part. They're exempt.
We're exempt.
Through Saturday nights, just because of the bar and restaurant traffic and how busy it is just to maintain public safety. So yeah, it's a big. But on campus, if it's a major incident, they typically call us to assist, but yeah, they handle on campus, but majority of their students are off campus and when they
Well, it sounds like it's a question above what this committee's for, but I find it interesting. How about that?
Chandler is. And so are there efficiencies?
As a thriving
I'm
business.
having a hard time hearing again.
They do. They have a lot of industry. They have a lot of business.
They're having a hard time hearing you online.
You want me to?
Yeah, if you want the box.
So what I noticed on those last 2 slides was that Chandler has a very low sales tax and the very low combined tax, total tax. And just wondering if there was efficiencies with the way that they're operating and their expenses are, if there's efficiencies we could pick up from that area. But that's a great point, right? They do have a lot of industry. They have a lot of manufacturing and they have a lot more business opportunity, but they sure are running cheap.
They bring businesses in, local.
And I would have to do a little more research about how their general fund is funded and what percentage of their sales taxes versus the total to see. Split. About some of their other fees.
So we can look into Chandler at the same time.
I'm just talk about something, so user fees, not completely understand yet, but it sounds like water, infrastructure protection fee, the WRIP is a type of fee.
Yes.
Because it's gonna be, and they generate over $1 million a year for a pretty small amount of bill, right? So could we create something, we talk about creating something completely related but different just for public safety? A whole, so we wouldn't have to necessarily increase taxes, we wouldn't have to do these, a bond or something like that in combination.
We have a nexus for what you're billing the fee for. So no, I don't see us putting something on the municipal bill for public safety in general. There's a nexus that these resources are protecting the water, wastewater, water resources, infrastructure. We got that nexus for this group, wildland fire thinning. But to say that we're gonna put a rate on your police or fire, there's not that nexus. You gotta have a nexus to charge the fee.
Thought you would say, but I thought I'd ask.
No,
No, these are great questions.
it's been asked before. We looked at it, but
Do Michelle, and the reason that that's still up there is you could say, what we call that RIP for short. Can we look at that RIP fee and what we're charging right now as a potential ongoing funding source? So that means if we looked at the fee and increased it, it could collect more than it's collecting.
We could use it to help fund
option.
the wildland fire request.
Definitely, right, figured that
So it
was.
could be an option in the.
Thank you, Chess. Not asking for that much, the wildland fire. Everybody else. Small funding source.
Next slide is, what does a sales tax mean to the consumer? This tax would apply to, dining bills or purchases of commodities like a refrigerator. This tax does not apply to food at the grocery store or residential rent, right? So those are things that are tax exempt. We have never collected, or at least in the 18 years that I've been here, we have never collected a sales tax on food or residential rent. We do collect on a commercial rent, but not residential rent. And a 1% sales tax is $1 on every $100 spent. And who pays? So anyone or entity that is making purchases within city limits or having goods delivered to city limits. So this is city residents, residents surrounding our community, visitors, businesses, and government entities. Because while we are exempt from property taxes, government entities are not exempt from sales tax.
Mentioned tax not collected on grocery store food or rents. Is that, that's a city decision, not a state decision?
So it was a city decision. It is now state law doesn't allow us to collect on residential rent now. And I think there's still bills out there about food as well, food for home consumption.
measure to limit what cities can do for food also in the future.
Silly question, but
We chose not to do.
beer at the grocery store versus buying a beer at a bar, is there tax on beer?
Yes, because alcohol, yes.
But it's not BBB tax, it's something else.
Working for retail.
But I should know this, but, because VRBOs are supposed to pay sales tax, right? Like,
Yes,
They do.
yes, absolutely. They pay the BBB tax, the 4.48.
Have you ever had a robust audit of all of those?
Great questions. The city has ability to do license requirements. That's what the state allows us to do. So we have a portal where people have to register and license their properties. They pay a fee. We can only collect so much in fees. It's a small portion. But that is our system that monitors, to make sure people are complying, they're registering, getting their license, putting their notices up in their facilities. So we do monitor it from that side.
Have you ever done an audit on a selected group of licensees?
Well, so we have a company that goes out and does the research on all the Airbnbs, and they bring that data to us and we compare it to who's licensed. And so then we take this small group of, I'm not gonna throw it, there's a small group of people that have not gotten their license. So that's what we use for audit. We use data that's actually out there and available. And everybody licensed for a few that we need to do further compliance work on.
Supposed to be paying sales tax, right?
So when you're going through a rental agency like Airbnb, VRBO, they collect the sales tax for the city and state and remit to the state. So we don't really have a data on everybody paying, but if you're on those portals and registering, that is being paid.
Right, but you can,
If somebody's doing a Craigslist item and not paying, that could be something that's a little bit off. But
city sales tax, right? 11, you do a sales tax audit or city sales tax. Could you not do the same thing for VRBO?
the auditing practice is the state's responsibility. They took a lot of those controls from us back in 2007 when they took over our collections. We can request, if we see something going on, and we can request the state auditor group, which then they do kind of a statewide. So they're not just every city's doing their own. We could put in a request. Will it get answered? It's hard to say.
Thank you.
Retail sales tax.
And we get more money out of them.
Can we raise the rate specifically on marijuana? I don't know.
I think you already had said they're making.
Because it's a retail category, so we'd have to raise the whole retail category.
We have about 20 some minutes left, so.
Dang, okay, yep, keep going. Shannon, were you? Yep, Shannon's up.
Mike, you let me know if we just want to introduce these and maybe start our conversation here next time. You all let me know what you want to do, because this is really where we get to the meat of talking about what we might want to consider moving forward. So we presented some one-time resources and ongoing resources. This is just trying to get them all on one page for you. So again, our one-time resources have capacity within the general fund that currently supports public safety and would continue to support public safety. Impact fees, which those are the growth-related ones, we have our obligation bond, which is supported by our secondary property tax, and then also our grant. So those provide one-time resources, and we use those for capital expenses, non-reoccurring expenses. So if, let's say, we have to pay a one-time fee for technology, we could use something like this, but then the ongoing would go in the next column. And then also maintenance catch-up. So one-time uses are there. And then if we switch over to the right-hand column, ongoing resources, again, we have money in the general fund that we use for public safety and will continue doing so. You've got your primary property tax. That's the one where we talked about we've got some capacity and are having that conversation with council currently as part of our budget process. We've got our rates and fees. Our RIT fee, and then the airport rates and fees, as well as our transaction privilege tax or our sales tax. These ongoing uses are used for personnel, for ongoing operations, as well as our debt financing. So if we need to get debt in order to pay for, let's say, construction of a facility, then an ongoing resource would help us pay for that. Thanks, Rick. Who's driving now, huh?
Look at me.
Yeah, so we wanted to give you some different examples. Now keep in mind, general fund is going to continue what it's contributing, and personnel that are part of general fund will continue to pay for those increased costs for those personnels that already exist there. what we've been talking about, and what this is really reflecting of is there's a gap, right? We need more money. The general fund cannot support with the current limit that we have in that fund type. And so here's some examples of some different things we could decide. A combination of funding sources. Maybe we do a sales tax for some of the ongoing, and we do a geo bond for the capital, since those can be one-time dollars. Maybe we do a combination where we do sales tax and RIP fund rates for ongoing, and we do the geo bond for capital expenses. What I'm really trying to show you here is you can do lots of different combinations. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all. You certainly could do that, but then you would need to find something that's ongoing, because a one-time resource can't be used for ongoing expenses. So on that right-hand side where we see sales tax, we couldn't substitute a geo bond for that because we can't use it for personnel. Does that make sense?
Quick question before we move on.
Yeah.
These are examples and these are our choices. Both of these are generating more revenue.
Correct.
I don't see up there, and I guess what I'm trying to ask is reallocating reallocating resources that have been pledged somewhere else. And where I'm going with this is like, I don't feel like we arrived at a $75 million shortfall overnight. And so can we add a column that says, return some of this back to the policymakers to take another look at their allocation choices? I look at what Rick's presented and, in what all the presenters have presented, and I look and I'm like, I'm not so sure we have a revenue problem as much as we have an allocation problem. So while I'm sure this is going to be some of the solution, reallocation by policymakers, is that something that this committee could suggest or direct?
So when you talk about reallocation, Rick, can you go back to the general fund slide where we show what percentages go to what groups? That's what you're talking about, John. And so I want to make sure that we're all looking at the same. Talking about reallocation, what I'm hearing is that you're saying that we would take money from some of these other divisions and reallocate it to police or fire.
Who I think is this an accumulation of underfunding requests year by year that get us to a specific point where now we're dealing with large aggregated numbers? Policymakers like, well, success for this, we're going to, the city grows, but begins to compound. Is that a fair?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think we're gonna have to find new revenue somewhere and I like what we've learned in this, but no, this is super complicated. My brain is very simple. So you'll have to forgive me for thinking this, but when cities are founded, there's basic services. I see on the police's patch, it's 1896, and I think on the fire staff patch, it's 1899. I mean, these were some of the basic services that started with the city and all cities. And we're looking at these basic taxes, be it property tax or sales tax, that are made to cover the basic services. And perhaps since we haven't allocated that as an accumulation of decisions over the years, I have a hard time wrapping my head around a public safety tax when that should be taken care of with the basic taxes. So I would like to, I guess, ask that that's at least an option that we put before this committee for discussion, is if we come up with some of this with some new revenue ideas, can we also potentially toss some of it back to the policymakers and have that conversation?
I think the difficulty is that reallocating means some of these other functions go away, and I'm not sure that.
I think it's a good conversation to have, though.
Free money.
Sure. I think we got so far away from core services over decades that we no longer are funding core services. If we don't change the process, we're not going to have enough money at any point in the future either. I think the process has to go back to having that third category of allocating non-core services money back to core services that the city should provide.
Of course, and some of that'll come back to the color of money.
And again, it might not be this committee. I get that, but I'm hesitant to look for other sources of money without at least acknowledging that we veered away from core services.
All we're doing is kicking the can down the road. We come up with a magic number and we get that number, you're gonna have this committee again together 10 years from now because we're still falling behind.
Well, I guess statement another way, it's like, the community added BB&B for additional things. Like we, whenever that was in the 80s or 90s, voted, hey, we want this extra stuff, so we're gonna put an extra tax. Just recently, as a community, we voted to increase the transportation tax because we wanted extra stuff. But when we talk about a public safety tax, that's not extra stuff. That's basic stuff. And so that's where my brain is just struggling. And I'm not saying any of these decisions are easy. And I understand it. If it comes from somewhere, it's got to come from somewhere. But that's also, what the policymakers signed up for, and it's difficult.
If I could add to that just a little bit, I think we've seen some great examples of surveys recently that have gone through our regional plan also, where priorities in the community have shifted a little bit from the big overarching priorities that they have of housing and climate change, and those have kind of shifted a little bit onto a more broad category of affordability that the community seems to very be worried about. With our minimum wage and with possible increases in housing costs that are being pushed forth. And those are very much concerns that the citizens have. And the increases, maybe we need to look at these conversations that might be really good to have with city council on making sure the allocation is where the citizens are looking for it's out of the core services that we're looking at. But we have some surveys that have come back recently from the regional plan that show some priorities. And we can try, because we're going to come up with our own survey questions. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it might be good.
Okay, can we go back to the?
The 618,000 marijuana excise tax per PD's presentation.
So what's the
Special tax. It's money that, it's a special tax for
Taxes. One's an excise tax and one's our sales tax. So we have a retail sales tax we collect. And there's an excise tax that goes to the state and then gets redistributed back.
the state takes us back?
It's the 618, yeah.
Yeah, that was that. No.
Following up on the gentleman's question behind me as it relates to marijuana tax, I had that question earlier. If we buy a beer at the grocery store, what tax is that? And is it under control of the city? I mean, in my brain, I'm thinking, is there such a thing as a vice tax? I mean, strikes me that PD probably has to respond to a lot of things that are a direct result to the sales of that product. Could tax it more.
On my list to look at marijuana, if we can.
I'm not saying marijuana, I'm saying the beer at the grocery store. Sorry, beer and liquor.
Yeah, it'd be similar because that's a retail category. We break them out like that. Haven't seen it done before, but I can check.
99-cent shooters that cause a lot of trouble. $1.99. Serious, I mean, right? Like after that, or that's.
Bringing up.
Yes, I think you had a question online. Maybe you want to jump in here?
It was just going back to that, the general budget. And that question in the room actually was going along the lines of what I was asking earlier in the meeting about the transfers out. And to me, that was the reallocation. As long as that budget pie included that $23 million, to me, that was just a reallocation within the pie piece that you were illustrating. Is that correct?
Are you talking about the transfers out slide?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Back
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah, because that was a reallocation of, different divisions of the city moving around some money, right? So for the fiscal year, it sounded like you were moving around $23 million among this set of pie pieces, right? The 23 million, that total. I take it that's a fiscal year amount, correct?
Yes, that's based on the current fiscal year.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So it's
Okay.
so it'd be just
Right.
the portion that could be reallocated. And most of that is the debt service payments we have to make. The second largest is the library
Yep.
that is our library. The others, yes, we can talk about those, sure.
Yeah, but if you go back to the general fund budget overview slide, that 23 million, it's in there as that total of $116 million, correct? It's not in addition to the 116 million. That 23 million is actually in that $116 million. Is that correct?
Top of the 116.
Right. So you're just kind of moving around, reallocating some funds from different divisions of the city to pay for those pieces of the transfers, correct?
They can hear you, Heidi. Do you want to?
I was just gonna say, it's not that we're really reallocating them because they're resources that weren't assigned to one of those, but they could have been, I guess, allocated to one of the ones that you see here.
Right.
Service.
I'm trying to marry up the transfers out budget items to your general fund budget items. I'm just wondering, is that 23 million reflected in your $116 million, or is the transfers out something different that is in addition to the 116 million?
It's in addition to that.
Okay.
This one is where we spend, and the other is where we transfer to other funds to spend. Instead of bringing those funds into the general fund, we just give them the revenues to spend for their programs. So it is in addition.
Okay. Seems to me that, the transfers out should have its own section of the pie so that we know that we're dealing with a budget amount in the city that is greater than that, because it sounds like even though it's one time and ongoing, these are actual expenses that are on top of that and should be accounted for. Just my opinion, but thank you.
They're accounted for in specific funds, just not the general.
There's another pie chart that's in our budget book, Vince, that actually does include all those dollars. That one that we're showing you is just specific to the general fund.
Okay.
So that's why it's not indicated there. It would be in the overall city budget pie chart.
All right.
That's
Sounds
earlier.
good. I figured it was somewhere in there because it just from a basic GL accounting standpoint, I mean, it's got to be there somewhere. But thank you for that explanation. It does make sense now.
Okay, good. Take a shot. So there's been reference a couple times during our meeting to a $75 million need within public safety. And I believe that's probably a one-year expense. Because again, these are ongoing expenses. So what we spend outside of capital has to be repeated every year, and it has an escalating cost. Because employee costs don't stay the same from year to year. And I want to caveat that because the numbers you're going to see here are going to be much higher than that $75 million. And I want to explain kind of the difference between the two. When you were getting presentations from staff, that's typically a one-time cost. And what we've done here is we've mapped it out for a 10-year period of time. Keep in mind, if you're doing a sales tax or something, that can be a 10-year, a 15-year, a 20-year period. But we wanted to show you what those expenses would look like over 10 years. So that's what we're funding these slides. So fire department here, you'll see they have a total of $200 and almost $20 million. And these are the categories that they spoke to you about during their presentation. So Station 7, that almost $66 million, doesn't mean that it takes us that much money to construct Station 7. It's all of the trucks that go with that. It's all of the people that go with that. It's the ongoing operating expenses of that building. It is everything associated with Station 7 over that 10-year period of time.
About construction of Station 7.
Is that number as well. Yeah, but I just didn't want you to think
Thank you.
that that's just construction alone.
And we're looking at, blend. I'm sorry, Michelle.
Yeah.
We're looking at a blend of operations and capital in this
You are,
for a 10-year total.
for 10-year total.
Do we have it anywhere broken out, operations versus capital year after year, or excuse me, annual?
Start diving into that during our next meeting. We just kind of wanted to show you these numbers to start with during our next meeting, and I kind of referenced it a little bit in my email. Not only that, but also to be able to give you tiered expenses in a priority order. So that way it's a little bit easier to have those discussions.
Operations, isn't that already covered?
So right now, the general fund is not having enough ongoing capacity to pay for all of the things that we have in place today. And so current operations are those ongoing expenses that we are funding with one-time dollars from year to year in order to balance the budget.
So the 28 million is actually what's needed.
It's a gap in today's
Gap in today's. Okay, great.
This is 10 years. So if you added,
year's worth.
right, you added the general fund times 10 years, so that for fire would be 23 billion times 10 years. Rough numbers. So we're looking at $500 million.
28 million is the 10-year total. So you'd actually divide it by 10 to figure out what it is by year.
Like,
This number's not bad enough for
So what you just stated is that we're funding our fire department in arrears. And we don't have a line item for all the yearly expenses that we're incurring.
Not all of them. So
Oh,
we have
so
a
there,
significant portion in ongoing, but we also have money that we're funding with one-time dollars, yes,
and that is every year.
every year.
Fire department that's necessary for current operations that we don't have funded on the yearly.
And you'll actually see current operations in every single one of these areas. So this is the wildland fire management. I think somebody alluded earlier, it's a smaller group, so there are smaller expenses for them over that 10-year total is $10 million. You'll see current operations for them as well as new positions and then that facility, that new wildland fire management facility.
That's above the 4 million we already have.
Yes. This is the gap to complete the facility. We did get $4 million from the state. I think it actually came in at 3 point. Saw the budget halfway, but yeah. We're starting with police. Police is actually over 2 slides, so that's why you don't see it in total on this slide. Again, you'll see that first one is current operations. You'll see their new positions, but keep in mind, there's also other new positions included in some of the other items as we go through the list. Broke theirs out a little different than some of the other teams. The next one. So you'll see the grand total for police department over that 10-year period is just over 245 million. We have our aircraft rescue firefighting out at our Flagstaff William Airport. This one is a little different because those last two where it says fire minimum staffing and fire safe staffing, the reason that they're labeled with fire at the beginning, because keep in mind, we are talking about merging those services. So those aircraft rescue firefighters would become part of the fire department. And so those two expenses would be triggered when that happens. The first two are specific to today's operation. So we've got the 11 million, just over 2 million for their new positions. This is emergency management, again, a smaller team, so their 10-year total is smaller than the other two large groups. Again, we've got current operations and then their new positions for a grand total just over $9 million. Reason why I wanted to show you these things is, again, I wanted to kind of talk about are there topics that you've heard about in these that you have questions on, make sense for you, that maybe don't make sense for you. This is really starting to try to get more reflection on what you've heard throughout all of the presentations. It's an important part of a committee's deliberation towards what you might want to recommend back to a city council. And so that's why we've put this slide in this deck particularly for today, because this is where we're headed.
Certainly think that gives everyone enough content to ruminate on over the next week.
Definitely, and you had a lot of good questions today. I've noted some of them, so we certainly can make sure that we're documenting so that folks have it.
Will you be prioritizing some of those you said for next week? Some of the, like I'm thinking of the police, really long.
Mhm.
Some of it could perhaps be funded by grants, right? Maybe.
Yes, like the cops hiring grant that we showed today.
Right, and then the funds. Some of the one-time
Mhm.
expenses. I mean, what I like to do is start breaking it out.
Yeah.
And what are the high priorities for the police department and what are the lower priorities? For them?
Yes.
They've got a lot of things out in there.
All of their asks, have they listed, this is you prior to creating?
We've actually been working to break them up into 5 tiers.
Okay.
And so it wouldn't be the police department, it would be everyone's. These are our tier 1 priorities. These are our tier 2 priorities. So yes, it's in priority order, but we tried to lump them together as well so that you're not having to look at, again, 4 different groups and merge it together. We're trying to work towards that one document that you can hold on to that says this is the priorities.
So keeping that out soon, I hope. I mean, obviously.
We're
before
meeting
next
again
week.
on it today in hopes that we can give it to you next week.
So enumerate priorities is important. Well, we'll have a lot of.
Some solutions.
All of this down, we have to determine what's going to sell to the general populace and be successful at the same time. Because anything is going to be of benefit.
And your community survey can be informative manner, because we can ask the community questions that allows us to get a sense of their thoughts on it as well. No, they can be, if you have a specific recommendation that you want to bring by, that's something that we can do as well. It just depends on how far along you are in the process, because we don't want that survey to get so close to your time that your recommendation is due that you don't have enough time to really talk about it. Yeah.
Anything else for the good of the order this afternoon?
Yeah, this is Vince. I have a question. You know what would be helpful for me is to see some sort of timeline of a potential spend based on your priorities, right, over the 10-year period, just to really quantify how that, that's, $500 million, that's $500 million or something like that over a 10-year period. How does that spend look like to you with your priorities and then your secondaries? I'd love to see something like that. That would really help me. Thank you.
We have that prepared, so we'll be ready to bring that as well.
Yeah, that's one of the thoughts I had too about like JW Powell, 7 or the police substation. I mean, how far out is that actually needed? That desired right away to have that fire station, or do we want to wait till some people populate the area?
Well, I mean, that's gonna come within a 5-year horizon. So
In a 5-year horizon?
And,
Okay.
yeah, and
there's
there
gonna
are
be some large structures out there like, yes, Temple.
Sure. I think there's still enough within. 5 years.
Significant increase in risk along that.
Yeah, there's already building going on in that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I know. I was thinking the southern part, there's not much. But
I think I have one last question, sorry. So if we come up with for a ballot measure in 27, is a 27 ballot measure more likely to pass, not to it being on an election year?
Think we would have to wait until 20.
So sales tax measures are required to go in November of even years. Secondary property tax can go in November, period. That's something that could wait. The sales tax is every even year.
And adjourn, see everyone next week.